The sound of engines ripped through the quiet night. Heavy bikes rolled in slow, loud, and deliberate, chrome shining under streetlights, leather jackets creaking as the riders stepped off. Laughter followed, not friendly laughter, the kind that looks for trouble. Steven Seagal stood near his car, calm and alone. No security, no cameras, no audience, just a quiet moment about to turn into chaos. One biker cracked his knuckles and smirked. "Hey, old man," he said, stepping closer. "You lost or just stupid enough to stand here?" The others laughed, circling in, boots scraping asphalt, engines still running, growling like warnings. Steven didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even change his expression. That calm, it irritated them. Another biker shoved his shoulder hard. "Didn't you hear me?" Steven took a slow breath and looked up. His eyes weren't angry. They were focused, sharp, unbothered. The bikers mistook silence for fear. Big mistake. One of them leaned in close, pointing a finger at Steven's chest. "You think you're tough just standing there?" Steven finally spoke, quietly, almost politely. "You should step away." The group exploded with laughter. "Listen to him. He thinks he's dangerous. What you gonna do, Grandpa?" Phones came out. Someone started recording. They had no idea. This wasn't some random man. This was Steven Seagal. A man trained in discipline, balance, and control. A fighter who built his life mastering movement, timing, and silence. But to them, he was just an easy target. An old guy, alone. One biker cracked his neck and said, "All right, boys, let's teach him some respect." Steven's posture changed, just slightly. Not aggressive, not defensive. Ready. And in that moment, before the first move, before the first mistake, the air shifted. Because when calm men are pushed too far, violence doesn't announce itself. It arrived suddenly, and the bikers were seconds away from learning the hardest lesson of their lives. It all started earlier that evening, long before the engines roared and tempers flared. Steven Seagal had stopped at a small roadside diner just off the highway, the kind of place truckers used to rest, where the coffee was strong and no one asked questions. He kept to himself. A quiet booth near the window, simple meal, no attention. To most people inside, he was just another older man passing through. Long hair tied back, dark jacket, calm presence. No one noticed him much, and that's exactly how he preferred it. After finishing his meal, Steven paid the bill, nodded politely to the waitress, and stepped outside into the cool night air. The parking lot was dimly lit, mostly empty, except for a row of motorcycles near the far end. Engines idled low. Men stood around laughing loudly, clearly enjoying being seen and heard. Steven walked toward his car at an unhurried pace. That's when one of the bikers noticed him. "Look at this guy," he said, nudging the others. Heads turned, eyes scanned Steven from head to toe. His slow walk, his relaxed shoulders, his lack of urgency. To them it looked like weakness. Another biker laughed. "Man doesn't even look worried." They watched as Steven reached his car and paused, searching his pocket for his keys. That pause, that single quiet moment, was all it took. One biker revved his engine louder than necessary. Another stepped away from the group and moved closer. Steven heard them, of course, he always did, but he didn't react. Years of discipline had taught him something most people never learn. Not every threat needs a response. Not every noise deserves attention. The bikers, however, saw that silence as permission. They spread out slightly, blocking the path back toward the diner. Not aggressively, not yet. Just enough to feel in control. "Hey," one called out, "you heading somewhere in a hurry?" Steven turned slowly, meeting his eyes. "No," he replied calmly. That single word only fueled them more. Another biker chuckled. "Then you don't mind talking?" Steven remained still. His hands were relaxed at his sides, his breathing steady. Anyone trained would have noticed it. The balance, the centered posture, the way his weight was evenly distributed. But these men didn't see that. They saw age, they saw isolation, they saw an opportunity. One biker stepped closer, invading Steven's space. "You know," he said, "this isn't the best place to stand around alone." Steven nodded once. "I'm aware." That calm answer irritated them. Most people either argued or begged. Steven did neither. Another biker moved behind him, laughing. "Man's got nerves, I'll give him that." Steven subtly adjusted his stance, just inches. A half step, barely noticeable. But it wasn't fear. It was preparation. In his mind, Steven had already assessed everything. Distance, angles, numbers, exits. He wasn't looking for a fight, he never was. But he was ready if one came. The bikers mistook his stillness for hesitation. One of them rolled his shoulders and said, "So, what are you going to do if we don't move?" Stephen looked at him. Calm, steady, unreadable. "I'm hoping you make the right choice," he said. The group laughed again. They had no idea that every second they wasted mocking him was another second Stephen was measuring them, and as the laughter grew louder, as confidence turned into arrogance, they crossed a line they couldn't uncross, because the moment one of them decided to touch him, everything was about to change, and they were completely unprepared for what came next. The laughter didn't stop. If anything, it grew louder, rougher, fueled by ego and numbers. The bikers fed off each other's confidence, mistaking control for dominance. One of them stepped forward close enough that Stephen could smell the alcohol on his breath. "You hear that?" the biker said, looking back at his friends. "He thinks we've got choices." More laughter. Another biker kicked a loose stone across the pavement. "Man's got jokes." Stephen remained still. His eyes moved quietly, not in panic, but in calculation. He noted the spacing between them. Who stood too close? Who leaned too far forward? The men didn't notice. They were too busy enjoying the moment. One biker reached out and grabbed the front of Stephen's jacket, bunching the fabric in his fist. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." That was the moment. Not dramatic, not explosive. Just a line crossed. Stephen's voice stayed calm. "Let go." The biker smirked. "Or what?" The answer came without words. In one smooth motion, Stephen rotated his wrist, stepping slightly offline. The biker's grip collapsed instantly, not from brute force, but from leverage. A sharp gasp cut through the air. The biker's face twisted in confusion as his arm bent in a way it wasn't meant to. Before anyone could react, Stephen took a single step forward, guiding the man's momentum down, hard. The biker hit the ground with a heavy thud, the sound echoing across the parking lot. Silence. For half a second, no one moved. Then chaos erupted. "What the? Did you see that? Get him!" Two bikers rushed in at once. Stephen didn't back away. He turned. One arm was redirected. A shoulder was controlled. A step misplaced. Another biker stumbled, lost his balance, and slammed into a parked motorcycle, sending it crashing to the ground. Metal clattered. Engines stalled. The sudden shift stunned them. This wasn't a fight like they expected. No wild punches, no shouting, just clean, precise movement. One biker swung clumsily. Stephen stepped inside the arc, his body close now, neutralizing power before it could build. A quick turn. A controlled push. The biker dropped to his knees, gasping. The rest froze. Confidence drained from their faces. They'd planned intimidation. They'd planned fear. They hadn't planned resistance, especially not like this. Stephen stood among them, breathing steady, posture relaxed. Not aggressive. Centered. One biker yelled, "Back off!" Another whispered, "What is he doing?" Stephen finally spoke again, his voice low but clear. "I told you to walk away." The words landed differently now. One biker tried to retreat but tripped over a fallen bike. Another raised his hands instinctively, unsure whether to attack or defend. The energy had changed completely. What started as entertainment had turned into uncertainty, fear. A biker at the edge of the group stared at Stephen, his expression shifting as recognition slowly set in. "Hold up," he said quietly. "Something's not right." Stephen didn't chase, didn't threaten. He simply stood there, calm in the center of the mess, while the men who moments ago felt powerful now felt exposed. And that's when one of them finally said the words that froze everyone in place. "Guys, I think that's Steven Seagal." The name cut through the night like a blade. Heads turned, eyes widened. Suddenly, everything made sense. And for the first time since this started, the bikers understood exactly how badly they had misjudged the man standing in front of them. The name hung in the air. Steven Seagal? At first, no one moved. Not because they were frozen by fear, but because their minds were racing, trying to catch up. The laughter was gone now. So were the smiles. One biker looked down at his friend still groaning on the pavement. Another stared at the fallen motorcycles scattered like toys. This wasn't supposed to happen. Moments ago, they were in control. Now the balance had shifted completely. A biker near the back pulled out his phone with shaking hands. He typed quickly, eyes darting between the screen and Steven's face. "It's him," he muttered. "I swear, it's him." Stephen said nothing. He didn't confirm it. He didn't deny it. He didn't need to. The way he stood told the story. Feet grounded, shoulders relaxed, eyes calm but alert. This wasn't anger. This was discipline. One biker took a step back, palms open. Hey, look, man, no disrespect. Another helped his friend sit up, panic creeping into his voice. We didn't know who you were. Stephen finally spoke. That shouldn't matter, he said quietly. The words cut deeper than shouting ever could. He took a slow step forward, not threatening, just present, and the group instinctively backed away. They felt it now. Not brute force, not intimidation, control. Years of training condensed into stillness. Stephen glanced at the man who had grabbed his jacket, still on the ground holding his wrist. Are you hurt? Stephen asked. The biker hesitated, then shook his head. No, he said. Just embarrassed. Stephen nodded once. Good. That single exchange broke the tension. The others exhaled, realizing he wasn't there to punish them, only to end the situation. A police siren sounded faintly in the distance. Someone had called it in. One biker whispered, "We should go." Stephen didn't stop them. He stepped aside, giving them a clear path out of the parking lot. No threats, no warnings, just an opening. The bikers scrambled to lift their fallen bikes. Hands shook. Voices stayed low. Gone was the bravado. Gone was the swagger. As engines started, one biker paused, helmet in hand. I'm sorry, he said, for all of it. Stephen met his eyes. Learn from it, he replied. The biker nodded, mounted his bike, and pulled away. One by one, they left. The parking lot grew quiet again. Stephen stood alone, just as he had at the start, but the air felt different now. The waitress from the diner peeked out from the door, eyes wide. Are you okay? She asked. Stephen smiled slightly. I'm fine. Police lights flashed at the end of the road as Stephen reached his car. He opened the door, paused for a moment, and looked back at the empty space where the confrontation had unfolded. No satisfaction, no triumph, just calm, because for Stephen the fight had ended the moment control was restored. He got into his car, started the engine, and drove away, leaving behind a lesson none of them would ever forget, not about fighting, but about restraint, and about how real power doesn't need to announce itself to be felt. By the time the last motorcycle disappeared down the highway, the parking lot felt strangely empty. Too quiet. The kind of silence that settles in after something intense has passed, when adrenaline fades and reality catches up. Stephen stood beside his car, adjusting his jacket, as if nothing unusual had happened. But for the people who had witnessed it, nothing felt normal anymore. A man sitting in a pickup truck across the lot finally stepped out, phone still raised. I thought it was him, he said under his breath. I just didn't want to believe it. The diner door creaked open again. Two truck drivers stood near the entrance, whispering urgently. That was Steven Seagal, wasn't it? No way, that was too clean. Stephen heard them. He didn't turn around. He'd spent most of his life avoiding attention like this. The sudden recognition, the disbelief, the rush to label him. He preferred anonymity. Inside the diner, the waitress was already telling the story in a shaky voice, replaying every movement in her head. No punches, she said. He barely touched them. Outside, the man with the phone finally spoke up, louder now. Sir, are you Steven Seagal? Stephen paused. For a moment, it looked like he might ignore the question entirely. Then he nodded once. A quiet confirmation. That was all it took. Murmurs spread instantly. Oh my God, I knew it. That explains everything. A few people stepped closer, cautiously now, respectfully. Not fans, witnesses. One of the truckers shook his head in disbelief. I've watched your movies, he said, but I've never seen anything like that in real life. Stephen looked at him calmly. Movies exaggerate, he replied. Real life doesn't need to. The man laughed nervously, still processing what he'd seen. Police cars pulled into the lot moments later, lights flashing red and blue across the pavement. Two officers stepped out, hands resting near their belts. They scanned the area. Fallen bikes, scuff marks, shaken bystanders. What happened here? One officer asked. The crowd spoke all at once. They started it. He didn't even throw a punch. He tried to walk away. Stephen raised a hand slightly, and the noise faded. It's over, he said calmly. No one's seriously hurt. One officer studied him more closely, then frowned. Wait, are you... Stephen nodded again. The officer exhaled slowly. Well, that explains the control, he said quietly. They took statements, confirmed no charges were being pressed, and watched as the situation wrapped up without further incident. As the police prepared to leave, one officer said, "You handled that better than most people could." Stephen replied simply, "I didn't want to fight." The crowd began to disperse. People returned to their meals, their trucks, their quiet routines, but none of them were the same. They'd seen something real. Stephen opened his car door. Before getting in, he turned back once more, addressing no one in particular. "Everyone deserves respect," he said, "until they prove otherwise." Then he got into the car and drove away. Long after he was gone, people would still talk about that night, not about the bikers, not about the fear, but about the moment they saw a legend in real life and realized true strength doesn't need noise, doesn't need recognition, and doesn't need permission to be real. It simply exists. Quiet. The road stretched ahead, empty and dark, as Stephen drove away from the diner. The glow of police lights faded in his rearview mirror, replaced by the steady rhythm of the highway. The night returned to what it had been before the engines and shouting, quiet, uneventful, ordinary. For Stephen, that was enough. He didn't replay the moment in his head, didn't feel pride, didn't feel anger. He'd learned long ago that holding on to conflict only gives it power. Back at the diner, the atmosphere was completely different. The waitress leaned against the counter, still shaken. One of the truckers shook his head slowly. "I've never seen anything like that," he said. "No rage, no showboating, just control." Another nodded. That's what scared them. He didn't need to prove anything. Outside, one of the bikers sat on the curb farther down the road, helmet beside him, wrist wrapped in a jacket sleeve. His friends stood quietly nearby, no jokes, no laughter. The adrenaline had drained from their bodies, leaving only reflection. "We messed up," one of them said quietly. Not because they lost a fight, but because they'd misunderstood strength. They replayed the moment again and again, how quickly things had turned, how powerless they'd felt the instant control replaced chaos. "He could have hurt us," another muttered, "but he didn't." That realization stayed with them longer than any bruise would have. Meanwhile, Stephen merged onto the main highway, the steady hum of tires beneath him. His hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, relaxed. For him, the situation had ended the moment the threat stopped. That was always the goal. Not domination, not revenge, resolution. Years of training weren't about winning fights. They were about avoiding unnecessary damage to others and to oneself. He thought briefly of the moment when the biker had grabbed his jacket, not with anger, with clarity. A choice had been made, and another choice had ended it. As miles passed, the night air cooled and the tension fully dissolved. Somewhere behind him, stories were already forming. People would exaggerate, details would change, voices would grow louder with each retelling. That didn't matter. The lesson would remain the same. Strength isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself with threats or numbers. Real power is quiet, disciplined, and controlled. Stephen took the next exit, disappearing into the darkness like any other traveler on the road. No applause, no spotlight, just movement forward. And back at the diner, long after the parking lot had been cleared and the tables wiped down, one thought stayed with everyone who witnessed the night. You never really know who you're standing in front of, and sometimes the calmest person in the room is the one you should never underestimate. By the next morning, the story had already started to travel, not as a headline, not as a viral clip, but as something quieter. A story people shared when talking about respect, restraint, and the danger of judging too quickly. At the diner, the waitress told it to a coworker while refilling coffee cups. "He never raised his voice," she said. "That's what I can't get over." One of the truckers added his own version later that day. The bikers were loud, he wasn't, and somehow that made all the difference. Everyone who had been there agreed on one thing. The moment wasn't about violence. It was about contrast. Noise versus silence, ego versus discipline, assumption versus reality. The bikers thought strength looked like numbers, leather jackets, and intimidation. They were wrong. Real strength stood quietly in front of them, offering a chance to walk away. and acting only when that chance was ignored. That's a lesson most people don't learn until it's too late. Too often we judge people by appearances, by age, by clothing, by how loudly they speak. We confuse calm with weakness. We confuse silence with fear. But the truth is the most dangerous storms don't announce themselves. They gather quietly. Steven Seagal didn't need to tell anyone who he was. He didn't need recognition, applause, or validation. His confidence came from years of discipline, patience, and self-control, and that kind of confidence doesn't need to prove itself. The bikers walked away with more than bruised pride. They walked away with perspective, a reminder that respect should never be selective, that the person you mock today might be the one who humbles you tomorrow. Because power isn't about how much space you take up, it's about how little you need. In everyday life, we face smaller versions of the same choice. Do we escalate or de-escalate? Do we react or respond? The loudest person in the room isn't always the strongest. Often, it's the calm one, watching, waiting, choosing restraint. That night ended without sirens, arrests, or headlines. But its impact lasted longer than any confrontation ever could. It reminded everyone who witnessed it, and everyone who heard the story afterward, that humility is not weakness, it's mastery. So the next time you feel disrespected, remember this: you don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to threaten to be powerful. Sometimes walking away is the greatest victory. If you believe real strength is calm control, type respect in the comments and tell us where you're watching from, because the world doesn't need more noise. It needs more discipline, humility, and quiet strength.